بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. Today, inshallah, continuing our prophetic characteristics series, we come to a very important characteristic of the Prophet ﷺ, and that is knowledge. The Prophet ﷺ was a person of knowledge. And kind of just a disclaimer, I'm going to be a little bit critical with the Muslim community. Someone can please shut the doors. Tell them to talk outside. Okay. So I'm going to be a little bit critical with the Muslim community as a whole, and regardless, not just Muslim Americans, but all Muslims across the globe, because this is something that they're very much lacking in, and they very much neglect and think that it's not really necessary for them. So just kind of put that there. If I seem a little bit harsh, don't take it personally, but try and understand the perspective I'm coming from, because this is something that it really is important, and most people don't recognize it, unfortunately. And really, when it comes to learning, Muslims are quite lazy. They just have a complete neglect for trying to understand the faith, even the basics of their faith. And we always hear the saying, seeking knowledge is an obligation of every male Muslim and female Muslim. Now, what this means is there are certain things that we need to do in order for our religion to be complete, or at least to fulfill the obligations of the faith, such as praying 5 times a day. Well, you need to know how to pray 5 times a day in order to fulfill that. You need to know how to fast. You need to know what nullifies fasting. You need to know how to make wudu. So, at minimum, these obligatory acts, the forbidden acts, right? It is an obligation on every Muslim, male and female, to know this stuff. And then the more a person knows, the better it is for their faith. And, laziness when it comes to, or neglecting knowledge, Islamic knowledge, to be honest, and I say this very bluntly, is a sign of lack of care for the faith itself. A person who neglects learning about their faith, who's lazy in that regard, it's a sign of their lack of interest in the faith itself. Their lack of care for the faith. Now, I'm not saying they're bad Muslims, right? Someone can be a very adherent, practicing Muslim who comes to the masjid, etc. However, as we will see, knowledge is fundamental to the faith. It is critical to the faith, as we will see, inshallah, throughout this talk. And, we have the common excuse, I was working all day, and I'm tired. By the time I get home, I'm dead exhausted, and Maghrib and Isha are late. I'd rather just do it at home. You know what? You are right. You are exhausted, and you worked hard, and you're doing it to provide for your family. However, look at what the scholars have said. لا ينال العلم براحة الجسم. A person will never attain knowledge when they are relaxing. And that is true on all types of knowledge. You're not going to get good grades in college if you are lazy. You're not going to do it while relaxing. Someone who wants to really dive into academia or go into certain professions, like especially medicine, right, or dentistry, or medical fields in general, you are more likely than not going to have to move. You're more likely not going to have to give up a lot of your social life. But is it worth it? Heck yeah, it's worth it. It's knowledge, right? No one will ever become knowledgeable while they're sitting back and relaxing. You can listen to lectures, and that's good. However, true knowledge is when you go and you interact with the teacher, him or herself. And when you look at our scholars, we all know this, we've all heard of this. They would travel 2 months on a camel or on their feet to gain one hadith, just one, to check the authenticity of one hadith. And I've heard this for so many years now, and you've heard this for many years now. It never ceases to amaze me. Look, I have dedicated my life to seeking knowledge. But if you were to tell me to travel, just go overseas, go take a flight to, for example, Pakistan, to get one piece of information and then go back, I'd probably say, you know what? That's not going to happen. And that is, an incompletion in my own pursuit of knowledge. I should be able to say, yes, I'm going to do it. I should have the enthusiasm to do it. The fact of the matter is, there's a lot, we need to work on. So yes, we might feel the fatigue of working and our routine lives. However, that should not discourage us from coming. And we try and make our talks where you'll be gaining Maghrib prayer and Isha prayer in the masjid. So imagine all the reward that you attain from just coming to this lecture. Whereas if you didn't come, you would not have attained that. It might seem very little. However, when you add it up, it's too much to just overlook. Imagine on the day of judgment when you see a mountain of good deeds just because you came to you went to a certain lecture, upon the knowledge that you're gaining with time. And that's another point. Knowledge isn't gained overnight. Scholars work year upon year, decade upon decade, in order to become who they were. Right? So knowledge is something you gain bit by bit and with a lot of patience. Any student of knowledge, think of any scholar that you know today, right? And look at their history, how they attained that knowledge. We all had to leave our homes. We all had to go and live in a third world country, right? Or at least a foreign country. We all had to deal with the hardships of being, a foreigner. We had to deal with homesickness and just the poor quality of life, or let's say the lower standard of life in those countries. Some of us got sick. I know a lot of brothers who now have digestive issues because of the poor quality of water and food, especially those who went to Egypt. And everyone has their stories. That's the fact of the matter. When we did this, we really got tired doing it. However, what we had gained from doing it is heck worth it. If I were to go back to just before going to Jordan, and someone were to tell me this is exactly what you're going to go through, right? I would have been, wow, that's quite difficult. But knowing what I know now, I do it without a doubt. Even if I knew it was going to be harder than last time, I would still do it. Why? Because what I gained is priceless. And that is knowledge and experience. And subhanAllah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when you do this, He puts gifts on in your path that you feel it. It wasn't just a time of study. For me, it was an adventure. It was a journey. There was so much I gained, so many memories that I cherish, so many, trips, so many people I met. It really was worth it. So although, many of us have other professions and it's not likely that they're going to go and travel for the sake of knowledge, however, you have a smaller version of that you can attain, whether it be here or other masajid as well. So knowledge isn't attained through relaxation. You have to kind of push yourself in order to gain it. Why? Because it is valuable, right? If you want that promotion, you have to push yourself. If you want that extra salary, you have to push yourself. If you want that degree, you have to push yourself. And if you want the treasures of Islam, you have to push yourself to dedicate some time for knowledge. Now, knowledge, as I mentioned, is critical to a person's faith. And Muslims who lack knowledge are very, very vulnerable. Very vulnerable. Because one of the strategies of the shaitan, of the people of misguidance, is to throw misconceptions about the faith. And the more a person lacks knowledge, the easier it is for the shaitan or these devils to do it. And we went through 18 years of that. 18 years. We've been bombarded by CNN, by Fox News, by all types of media, right and left. Right? Until it became in the best interest of the left-wing media to be allies with Muslims once Mr. Trump came. That's the fact of the matter. And I just kind of on a tangent, never think, and I will mention this in one of my future khutbahs, never think that these people who are embracing us actually care about our faith. They have an agenda, and that agenda is, liberalism, universality. We accept everyone, right? And we're okay with everyone, and that is our message. But if you truly interact with them, and I challenge you to do this, when our two congresswomen, right, the Muslim congressmen, are sitting there dancing, with their LGBT friends, right, the transgenders and whatnot, and they post their stuff on Twitter and Instagram, wherever they put it. Look at the comments. Look at the comments. Look at them. I challenge you to do it. People are saying, never think Muslims care about LGBT. They hate LGBT and all this. Do not think that we are okay in their eyes. We are just part of the game. That's what it is, right? And Trump is an evidence of that. Pre-Trump, we were terrorists, right? We were extremists, we were women abusers, etc. As soon as Trump came and started using us as a pawn, well, okay, hey, why don't you guys come on our side and we can use you against, Trump. Say, we are embracing, we're all loving, etc. Okay, now I'm not saying that we should break any allies, allegiances. I'm not saying we should be harsh against anyone. That's beyond the point. But let's just, keep things in perspective. Muslims who lack knowledge are vulnerable. And it is really quite sad when, our youth are, questioned with very simple questions and it ruins their faith, right? Why are Muslims bad to women? Oh my God, well, we're bad to women. That means our religion is wrong. But hold up, right? Why do you say we're bad to women? Do you see how that works? I'm sure you know people like this. Young Muslims who, you guys mistreat women. Why? Because they wear the hijab. Oh my God, he's right. My faith is wrong. And they go into this spiritual crisis because of a simple misconception that they had no idea how to even process, right? The Western world has no right to question our treatment of women when 1 million women are raped in this country every year, right? When all these, unequal pay, when women, so many women are single mothers. Why? Because, hey, you know what? I'm just going to go check out another woman. I'm bored of you. Okay? I'm not saying the Muslim world doesn't have any problems. They have many problems that need to be dealt with. But, let's be honest. Who's going to preach to us equality and whatnot? Right? Let's just be quite frank and honest. So you have these Muslim youth who are questioned with very silly questions. Another one. If God is all powerful and God is all good, why is there evil? That's such a silly notion. It's such a silly philosophical question, right? Okay, this is a very simple answer to that, because God is all knowledgeable and He's all wise, right? It's not always black and white. God is all powerful, yes, and yes, He's all good, but He's also all wise. He knows when to be merciful and when not to be merciful. And He knows how to bring mercy to a person, even though that person might not understand that. These are very simple questions to answer, and it's very unfortunate that our youth and even the adults aren't equipped with the ability to answer these questions. And Sheikh Yasser, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect him, said something, told me a very interesting story. He said that, he met with a young Muslim individual born in a Muslim family who left the faith. So Yasser sat with him and tried talking to him and, okay, what's wrong? What are your questions? He said, this is 1 and this is 2. These are my problems, 3, 4, 5. Sheikh Yasser answered them all, and he showed him that that's not the case. He said, you know what? If I were to have known this before, I would have stayed a Muslim, but it's too late now, right? Why? Our Muslims, the youth, some of them are leaving the faith. Why? Simply because they have a very skewed understanding of the faith, right? So we, as adults first, need to equip ourselves with knowledge so that we can transfer that to the kids. Now, it's always disheartening when parents come to me and say, Sheikh, my son asked me this question. It's a very simple question, very simple to answer. I don't know what to answer, right? I don't know how to reply. Well, you need to put the effort to teach yourself so that when your kids ask, they don't need to go through a chain of, imams to answer that. You get it done quickly from yourself. Not only are you nourishing your own spirituality, you're also nourishing your children as well. So this is, it's very serious. It's very serious. Knowledge is important, and our Prophet ﷺ was an embodiment of knowledge. Also, I want to point one more thing in this introduction, and that is, knowledge is of 2 types. You have spiritual knowledge, Islamic knowledge, and you also have secular knowledge. Now, there's nothing wrong with seeking secular knowledge. However, and in fact, scholars, when you look at scholars, especially early on, the first few generations, the first few centuries, you find that scholars were more than Islamic scholars. They were intellectuals, right? So Imam al-Qarafi, the renowned Maliki scholar, very intelligent individual, says that the fuqaha, the jurists, need to study other sciences. They cannot just be exclusively fuqaha. They need to know these other sciences because these will help them understand their own fiqh. Knowing these things will help them understand their own fiqh. And you find that scholars had a hobby of a different knowledge, right? So Ibn Qayyim and Ibn Jawzi were both physicians. They were scholars first, right? And they were also physicians. And you have others who were in mathematics, they were in philosophy, they were etc. and whatnot. So these weren't just intellectual Muslim scholars, they were actually intellectuals. And they were able to engage the society at a much higher level than what you would see today, right? So it's not just about Islamic knowledge, secular knowledge is also beneficial. And it's really quite interesting. And I see this in a very optimistic way. When you look at the imams of the West, you find that most of them have a secular degree, right? So yes, Sheikh Yasir Qadi has a degree in biochemical engineering, I think, right? Omar Suleiman has a degree in some sort of secular science. And so I thought, okay, why is that? Before going, they tend to get a degree in a secular science. SubhanAllah, later on I figured out, you know what, it might be because we are needed to be intellectuals, not just Muslim scholars. We need to be able to engage society as a whole. Now, so there's nothing wrong with seeking secular knowledge. However, Imam al-Shatibi points out something very important, and this is something that's affecting our own community today. He says that if a person only learns the secular sciences, you find that it causes deviation in their own understanding of the faith. In other words, how do we understand that in modern terms today? Each science has its own epistemology. And epistemology is a method of understanding, coming to conclusions, really. In biology or in certain biological sciences, you have the scientific method, right? You start off with an observation. And this observation, you see that it's consistent, it repeats itself. And through the observation, you come up with a hypothesis. And then you test the hypothesis multiple times, right? And the way you test it needs to be recorded, and it needs to be replicable, right? If you find that the results are consistent in various scenarios and situations, you develop it into a theory, right? But as I mentioned, it needs to be replicable so that other people can test it out as well and see if it is, in fact, consistent. So there's a method of coming up with a conclusion. Likewise, in psychology, you have research methods. That's one of the courses you have to take. Right? It's an amazing course because it teaches you, okay, how do we engage this science in an applicable manner? It's no longer abstract. How do you, for example, conduct a study? How do you build a survey? Making a survey is actually very difficult. It's very difficult because every word makes a difference. So when people critique, for example, psychological studies, they're going to look at the survey, right? And if the survey isn't pristine, they can start finding gaps in the questions themselves. And what you find, when certain organizations conduct studies and research on the Muslim community in America, right? They come up with very strange results. Well, why? Because the way they word the questions, it makes it very deceiving. If you answer yes, you feed into what we're trying to say, and if you answer no, you feed into what we're trying to say, like that. So it needs to be critiqued. And every science has its methodology. What happens is if the person is only trained in a secular science, right? And this is the only way they understand how to process information. What they do is they take that epistemology and apply it on Islam. And they see that there are inconsistencies. No, Islam has its own epistemology. It has its own way of coming to and drawing conclusions. And you find this very much in the philosophers of old, like Ibn Sina, Farabi, Ibn Rushd, Ibn Arabi, in these philosophers, Al-Kindi. What happens is they studied Aristotelian philosophy. And Aristotelian philosophy has its own epistemology. It has its own fundamental view of the world. What they do is they take that and now they're applying it to the study of the Quran. So Ibn Sina actually spent time studying the Quran. Same with Farabi and others. But they didn't understand how to process the information presented by the Quran. So what ends up happening, they come up with very skewed and very heterodox opinions. Like Ibn Sina said that heaven and hell is not real. These are just stories that the prophets would tell their people to create an ordered society. I mean, to us, that's heretical. That's blasphemy. Right? Say that the prophets were lying to the people in order to gain their allegiance and to create order in society. That's heretical to us. Where does that come from? What it comes from their Aristotelian thought. So to our dear brothers and sisters who are pursuing certain professions outside the realm of Islam, you have to have a certain amount of Islamic knowledge, or at least respect the fact that these are two separate sciences. And to give you an example of this, when you look at science and philosophy, right? Science and philosophy, these are two different realms, but what you find is that they sometimes intertwine. So a scientist has a way of presenting information, and a philosopher has a way of presenting information. Now, what happens when the scientist starts speaking as a philosopher? This becomes tricky, right? What's the difference? Well, a scientist presents information based on the evidence, right? Based on evidence, and evidence is something that is testable, observable. Whereas the philosopher presents information based on logic and reasoning, right? So when the philosopher starts talking about, for example, the essence of the human being is the soul. That is what defines the human being. Well, how do you prove that? With philosophical arguments. Or some say that no, the essence of the human being is the body. We are an animal, right? How do you present that? How do you prove that? Well, through logical arguments. It's not through tangible arguments or evidences. So what happens when the scientist comes and starts speaking as a philosopher, not a scientist, right? So when someone like Richard Dawkins or these scientists, sometimes they're not talking as a scientist, they're talking as a philosopher, but we see them as a scientist, so we think that it's science, right? And I'll give you an example of that. Anthony Flew, who was previously an atheist, and later on in his life he changed his mind. He has an interesting book called There Is a God, How the Most Notorious Atheist Changed His Mind. It's an interesting book, I really recommend reading it. He says something in there that really caught my eye. He says that this theory of the multiverse, you hear of this? There's a multiverse, meaning there's more than one universe. For example, there might be more than one Earth, right? But in different dimensions. We can't access them, and they can't access us, at least not now, right? And Anthony Flew mentioned something, that sometimes they present this theory not because evidence suggests it is there, but rather in order to counter the theist argument of where does our beginning come from? How did we come about? How did we come out of nothing? They want to try and counter that by saying there's a multiverse. The previous universe caused this reaction which created our universe. Do you see the difference? Right? So when they say there's a multiverse, they're not speaking as a scientist who has come across evidences that suggest that there's a multiverse. Rather, they're talking as a philosopher who wants to counter the argument of the theist, someone who believes in God. Now, I'm not saying there's no such thing as a multiverse or there's no proof or the Quran rejects that. That's beyond the point I'm trying to make. But when we don't have knowledge, these things come across us and we take them as if they are factual when they are not, right? So when atheists try to present their arguments, they present it in a scientific manner when really it's not scientific, it's philosophical. And if we don't have the knowledge to deal with those issues and address them, well, one can see how vulnerable they really are, right? Or, for example, when it comes to a certain argument that is seemingly contrary to Islam, such as evolution, right? Now, is evolution a theory or is Allah, etc. and whatnot? And we know that story. If anyone wants more information on that, they can look at Sheikh Yasir Qadi's lecture called Evolution in Islam, I believe, or in the Quran. It's a 30-minute lecture. I really strongly recommend it to everyone. So Imam Shatibi warns the Muslims, do not just solely seek secular sciences. Make sure you also understand the Islamic realm as well. They are two different paradigms with two different methods of understanding realities, at least in each particular realm. Knowledge is part of a person's perfection. Meaning, the more knowledgeable a person is, the more complete their personality is, the more complete their humanity is. Now, I'm sure there are many scenarios or individuals, examples of people who are knowledgeable but evil. Sure, right? But that doesn't change from the fact that someone who is more knowledgeable is more capable. And that's why when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَوْ يُؤَاخِذُ اللَّهُ النَّاسَ بِمَا كَسَبُوا مَا تَرَكَ عَلَى ظَهْرِهَا مِنْ دَابَّةٍ. No, it's not it. So verse before it. إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُمْسِكُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ. No. SubhanAllah. I forgot. Yes, Muhammad, I did forget. In the end, he says that إِنَّهُ كَانَ عَلِيمًا قَدِيرًا وَمَا كَانَ اللَّهُ لِيُعْجِزَهُ مِنْ شَيْءٍ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَلَا فِي الْأَرْضِ إِنَّهُ كَانَ عَلِيمًا قَدِيرًا. Right? Nothing can escape Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nothing can overpower Allah or beat Him in the heavens or the earth. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala proves that by saying that He is the all-knowledgeable and the all-capable. Someone might be capable of doing something, but they lack the knowledge to execute it. And someone might have the knowledge to attain something, but they lack the ability to execute it, right? The actual physical strength. Meaning someone might be extremely smart, and they say, I have for example, the solution to the economic problems of the world. They have that knowledge. But they're nobody. They have no government, backing, or they have no institution to fund their abilities or their strategies, or even apply their method, for example. So you see that here. Here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pointing to His completion and His complete capabilities because He is infinitely knowledgeable. So the more knowledge we have, the more complete our personalities and our humanity really is. Also, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He talks about Adam, the creation of Adam, what is the main things He points to? Knowledge. وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا. And He taught Adam the names of everything. So knowledge is essential to the human being. It's what makes us unique. It's what differentiates us from animals and from other species. Right? An animal has a certain set of functions. You can't really go beyond that. Sure, you can learn a few tricks, but can it become a scientist? No. Can it invent something? No. So part of our humanity and our perfection is actually knowledge. So the more knowledge we have, the more complete we are as individuals. So that is very important, and always remember that. Therefore, if knowledge is part of our complete demeanor, then know, since the Prophet ﷺ is the most complete human being, he is the most knowledgeable as well. Does that make sense? So if we see knowledge as being part of a person's a complete person, right, or it completes the individual, since we believe the Prophet ﷺ is the most complete individual, by default he must be the most knowledgeable. Of course, in Islamic sciences, right? In a way, he knows that which perfects his personality and perfects his relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? Also, knowledge is a divine attribute, which I kind of pointed out already. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Alim. And as we mentioned before, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a name, it is promoted, it is praiseworthy when we achieve that name as well. Of course, with the difference between us, the created, and the Creator subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Alim yuhibbul ulama. Allah is the knowledgeable, and He loves those who are knowledgeable. And we all know the verses in the Quran that praises the people of knowledge. يَرْفَعِ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مِنْكُمْ وَالَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْعِلْمَ دَرَجَاتٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevates in status the believers among you, especially those who have knowledge. إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاءِ. Right? The ones who have this strong emotional connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are the scholars. Right? Among others, لَا يَسْتَوِي الَّذِينَ يَعْلَمُونَ وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. The people who know are not equal to those who don't know. They are superior. So take that to heart. Now, to kind of push on this concept of the importance of knowledge, the Quranic use for the word ilm is almost synonymous to guidance. Meaning the more knowledge a person has, Islamic knowledge, the more on guidance they can be. Right? I don't want to say it's tantamount to guidance, because some people have knowledge but they don't apply it. So there's also that other element. So guidance is knowledge and then the application of that knowledge. But the way the Quran uses the word knowledge, ilm, it's almost synonymous to guidance. Someone who has knowledge of Islam is someone who is guided. Likewise, ignorance is almost synonymous to sin and deviation and misguidance. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, kind of displaying the knowledge of the Prophet ﷺ, tells us a supplication, invocation. And this is the only invocation that tells us to ask an increase of something. And it's not iman. And it's not closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is وَقُلْ رَبِّ زِدْنِي عِلْمًا. And say, oh Allah, my Lord, increase me in knowledge. Okay, why isn't there a supplication or hadith or a verse says, Rabbi zidni imana? There's nothing wrong with saying that, by the way. Nothing wrong with saying, oh Allah, increase my iman. There's nothing wrong with it. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us the essence of that. You want iman? You have to have knowledge. So that's why it is Rabbi zidni ilma. The more knowledge a person has, the more iman is able to flourish in the heart of that person. Because knowledge really changes the way you see the world. It points you to the treasures of the Quran, to the treasures of the natural world around us, the treasures of spirituality, the treasures of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can offer us. Also, displaying the Prophet ﷺ's knowledge and the fact that he was acting upon knowledge. قُلْ إِنِّي نُهِيتُ أَنْ أَعْبُدَ الَّذِينَ تَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ لَمَّا جَاءَنِيَ الْبَيِّنَاتُ مِن رَبِّي. Say, I have been prohibited from worshipping besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or worshipping that which you invoke besides Allah, when knowledge or when clarity has come to me. In other words, the Prophet ﷺ is told to say, knowledge has come to me, evidence and proof and clarity has come to me that true faith is monotheism, and false faith is other than that, polytheism, paganism, what Quraysh was on. Therefore, I am abstaining from what you do. I reject what you do because knowledge has come to me. And Ibrahim alayhi salam says the same thing to his father. إِنِّي قَدْ جَاءَنِي مِنَ الْعِلْمِ مَا لَمْ يَأْتِكَ. He says, oh my father, knowledge has come to me that which has not come to you. Saying that I am acting upon knowledge. I'm not acting just upon emotion. It is knowledge that has been made clear to me, or has made clear to me the fact that worshipping other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is false. And we know the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam. It seems like he became a prophet after dealing with his people. Again, this is just my opinion, it's what it seems like in the Quran. That he became a prophet after the whole scenario with his people. Right? Therefore, when he was preaching monotheism, he was doing it based on his rationale. He looked at the sun and the moon and the stars in Surah Al-An'am, right? And he disproved any false theologies ascribed to them. And the argument is as follows. He said, okay, look, I'm looking at the stars, this is my God, right? And then when daytime came, when those stars set, right, he said, okay, what I want with a God who is there, and then at a certain time, it's not there. It cannot be the God, right? Now we know today that the star is still there. But from that perception, it's as if it's no longer there. There's no traces of it. Meaning, if we lived in a world that was constantly lit, would we ever know that there are stars outside unless we actually leave the atmosphere? We wouldn't know, right? There's no trace of it. So why would I worship something that leaves behind no trace? The same thing with the moon and the same thing with the sun. So he logically came to the conclusion that what his people were worshiping, that their theology was false. And that was based on knowledge. Also, the Prophet ﷺ tells us, إِنَّ أَتْقَاكُمْ وَأَعْلَمَكُمْ بِاللَّهِ أَنَا. And this hadith is in Bukhari and Muslim. Indeed, the most pious amongst you, as well as the most knowledgeable amongst you, is me, the Prophet ﷺ. So when he talks to us, when he tells us, it's always based on knowledge. And if you study his tradition, his hadith, his words, you find things that are amazing, right? It's really interesting. The Prophet ﷺ says, لولا أن أشق على أمتي لأمرتهم بالسواك عند كل صلاة, and in another narration, عند كل wudu. Prophet ﷺ says, if it wasn't going to be a burden on my people, I would tell them to use the siwak every time they pray or every time they make wudu. And I always thought, that was strange, because what I was told is if you brush too much, it wears away the enamel, as it's called, that layer that kind of protects the teeth. So I thought, okay, how does that work? New research suggests the following. The way a person gets a cavity is as follows. When you eat, certain bacteria remains on your teeth. And that bacteria feeds off of whatever you eat. Okay, so let's say you have breakfast. Now there's some bacteria on your teeth. The next time you eat, that bacteria is now growing because it's eating from what you're eating. Right? That's how cavities occur, right? So my cousin telling me this, he's a dentist. He says now it's better that every time you eat, before you eat, you kind of just wipe your teeth. Not brush it, wipe your teeth. So that's subhanAllah. You know, if we are doing it 5 times a day with every prayer, that means we are getting rid of that bacteria. Look at the knowledge. Look at what he presents us, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And prior to that, you might have people questioning, oh, that's too much, it's against science and it's against this. Yeah, here we have this new piece of information, subhanAllah. So the Prophet ﷺ acted upon piety as well as knowledge. He presented piety and he presented knowledge. Yes. Also, Salman al-Farisi has a conversation with a Jewish fellow, and in it, this Jewish fellow tells Salman, قَدْ عَلَّمَكُمْ نَبِيُّكُمْ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ حَتَّى الْخَرَاءَ. Right? Now this is, today that the word is quite vulgar in the Arabic language, right? For those who know it. Well, back then I guess it was okay. This Jewish person tells Salman al-Farisi, I hear that your Prophet ﷺ told you how to do everything, or taught you about everything, even the way you defecate, right? So look at Salman al-Farisi's reply. He says, Ajal. He says, yes, that's true. لقد نهانا أن نستقبل القبلة لغائط أو بول أو أن نستنجي باليمين أو أن نستنجي بأقل من 3 أحجار أو أن نستنجي برجيع أو بعظم. And this hadith is in Muslim. It says, yes, the Prophet ﷺ did teach us even how to use the bathroom. And he told us not to face the Qibla, nor have our backs to the Qibla. And he taught us not to wipe ourselves with our right hand, use the left hand. Also not to wipe with less than 3 rocks. Back in the day, they didn't have tissues, they used to use rocks, right? So we use tissues today, so that takes the same ruling. If there is remainder, right, and it's not gone with 1, then do 3, minimum of 3. And he taught us not to wipe ourselves with rajia, which is throw up, or dung, or using a bone. Now, of course, today we're not going to do that. But back in the day, they go to the desert. That was their bathroom. They would go to the desert, and they might find something. Hey, imagine going to the bathroom and you forget to take some rocks with you, right? You're looking around, what's there? You find a bone. The Prophet ﷺ says, don't use a bone, don't use dung of animals. Now, on the flip side, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala really reprimands, rebukes ignorance and lack of knowledge and acting spiritually without knowledge. So he says, وَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ مِمَّنِ افْتَرَى عَلَى اللَّهِ كَذِبًا لِيُضِلَّ النَّاسَ بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. Right? And who is more unjust than the one who lies about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, makes something up, says something false about Allah, causing the deviation of people. And they do that without knowledge. In other words, as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that those who promote something, they teach something, they call to something without knowledge, they end up misguiding people. And man, now we go on another tangent. The past few weeks I've been mentioning trends and trends. Man, how misguided people are becoming. Why? Because their role models, right? Their spiritual and their intellectual leaders are celebrities. Guess what? Celebrities aren't scholars. They don't know what they're talking about when it comes to these issues. Sure, they might have some personal advice that they can give. That's valuable, sure. But knowledge is something and personal advice is something else, right? Take someone like Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky is an atheist, right? And obviously we have our differences. And even though we might disagree with his theology, his knowledge will, even though we disagree with what he might be preaching, his knowledge is enough to where what he preaches won't cause people to go not astray. It won't cause people to fall into ruins. There's a big difference. Know who you're taking knowledge from. And unfortunately in America, Hollywood is now the intellectual business. It's what's teaching people. And that's very problematic. Very problematic, because Hollywood is amoral. It could care less about morality, right? It's way far left, and it does have an agenda, an anti-religious agenda. Let's just put that out there. Right? So when they say things, they are misguiding people. Why? Because they are saying things without knowledge. Someone might look like, a beard, and the thawb is above the ankles, right? Even halfway down their foreleg and whatnot, and they're قال Allah and قال Rasul, but they're speaking without knowledge, and they misguide people. and they cause them to go astray. And sometimes they cause them to get killed. Why? We need to do this. Al-jihad. We got to fight the world. We got to restore the caliphate. How many young individuals were killed because of these ignorant people? How many families are weeping and hurting at the loss of their child, right? Because these guys spoke without knowledge. They acted without knowledge. If you want to help Islam, be knowledgeable and take this saying. This is a profound saying. Al-Muslim al-Jahil الذي يريد نصرة الدين يضر الدين أكثر من العالم العدو. The ignorant Muslim who wants to help the religion, give it victory, ends up harming the religion more than a knowledgeable enemy. Subhanallah. Look at that. Very powerful. Knowledge is extremely important. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِنَّ كَثِيرًا لَيُضِلُّونَ النَّاسَ بِأَهْوَائِهِمْ بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. Allah mentions another point, another problem of ignorance and speaking without knowledge. Indeed, a lot of people will misguide others, will misguide people by their desires without knowledge. Meaning when someone speaks without knowledge, what are they speaking from? They're speaking from desire. And desire doesn't necessarily mean I'm looking to gain something. Desire is a little bit broader than that in the Quranic context. What it means is they are talking from something that is just a figment of their own imagination. That's what they're preaching. This is truth and this is no. Look, if you want to help Islam, learn. Right? And sometimes people do this in a very eloquent manner. They start presenting information, but it's not really information, it's opinions. I think this is it, but they present in a way as if it is it. Right? They present things as if it's factual when it's not factual, just an opinion. That's why when you get into like PhD programs, right? Sometimes it's very difficult because now you can't just make claims. You can't just say this is it. But you have to back it up. You have to prove it, you have to research it. You have to show that you're actually presenting something of value. Whether it's right and wrong, that's a different thing. But you cannot just make a claim and act as if that's reality and that's the truth. You have to back it up. If you have no backing, it's nothing. It's absolutely worthless. Also, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّمَا التَّوْبَةُ عَلَى اللَّهِ لِلَّذِينَ يَعْمَلُونَ السُّوءَ بِجَهَالَةٍ. Tawbah is on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning He will accept tawbah from people who do sin out of ignorance. So ignorance also opens the door to sinning and to more sinning. No, someone who is knowledgeable, a scholar, isn't sinless. They have sins, right? But there's a difference between someone who kind of is overpowered by maybe their emotions or something, and the difference between someone who is just ignorant and acting upon ignorance, right? Now, the harms of ignorance and the harms of speaking without knowledge. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala points to three serious consequences, three serious results and consequences of ignorance and lacking knowledge. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قَدْ خَسِرَ الَّذِينَ قَتَلُوا أَوْلَادَهُمْ سَفَهًا بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ وَحَرَّمُوا مَا رَزَقَهُمُ اللَّهُ افتراءً عَلَى اللَّهِ قَدْ ضَلُّوا وَمَا كَانُوا مُهْتَدِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, those who kill their children, right, have lost. They are in a loss. They kill their children, سَفَهًا بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ, foolishly without knowledge. And also they forbid what Allah has made permissible, again without knowledge. Someone who speaks without knowledge ends up resulting in very, very harsh ways, such as infanticide. What is it? The word? Infanticide, right? Is that how you pronounce it? I might be mispronouncing it. Basically, killing children. So Quraysh, when they would kill their children, and by the way, this wasn't rampant. It wasn't every tribe was killing their daughters and whatnot. This occurred every now and then. But it seems like society was okay with it. It just kind of turned a blind eye. And the story of Umar radiallahu anh burying his daughter and whatnot, that's fabricated. It's not real. Okay? So don't think that the Arabs were left and right killing their daughters and killing their children and whatnot. It occurred every now and then. But it seems like from a societal perspective, it was okay. They were okay with it if it happened. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that is the result of ignorance and lack of knowledge. The forbidding of that which is permissible is also a result of lack of knowledge. So when you look at, for example, the the overly conservative Muslims, right, who are speaking without knowledge, without training in Islam, end up making things haram that aren't haram. And that creates problems, especially, with my generation of Muslims. Everything is haram. That's how we grew up understanding Islam. Everything and its mother is haram. Right? That's the way it is. But when you learn, you find that a lot of it is completely baseless. And that is very problematic. That causes people to stray from Islam. Also, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَسُبُّوا الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ فَيَسُبُّوا اللَّهَ عَدْوًا بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. Do not curse or mock what is worshipped besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because it will result in them cursing and mocking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without knowledge. So speaking and acting without knowledge ends up resulting in more harm on the Muslims than it is on the non-Muslims. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala becomes a mockery, becomes a joke. Why? Because people are acting without knowledge. Also, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَجَعَلُوا لِلَّهِ شُرَكَاءَ الْجِنَّ وَخَلَقَهُم وَخَرَقُوا لَهُ بَنِينَ وَبَنَاتٍ بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. And they forge associates with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from amongst the jinn, right? And they made up notions that He has children and daughters, boys and girls, sons and daughters, without knowledge. Meaning without knowledge, ignorance creates massive deviations in theology. The zenith of that is shirk, worshipping other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because when you analyze this concept of shirk, paganism, polytheism, right, and you try and understand its roots, where is it coming from? It's not based on any evidence. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He challenges the pagan, He says, what knowledge do you have? What evidence can you present that these are gods that are worthy of worship? Or that they even have any abilities to function or to provide you or to grant you any wishes? So false theologies is founded and rooted in ignorance and lack of knowledge. And to go into two final sections, it is important to also understand how the Prophet ﷺ engaged his companions and how he taught them. Because knowing is one thing, but transferring the information is a whole different thing. Someone can be extremely knowledgeable, but their ability to articulate that knowledge or to share it or to transfer it to other people might be a little bit weaker, right? They don't have this charisma, they don't have this, they're not good at speaking, or they're not eloquent, or they're just not a good writer, right? So here are three ways, there are more, but here are three ways the Prophet ﷺ, I put two actually. Two ways the Prophet ﷺ would transfer knowledge. Number one, when he presented information, he began with a question, right? Instead of just saying, hey guys, this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, or this is what this verse means, or this is the ruling on something, he would present it in a question, right? So he'd say, for example, Ya Mu'adh, atadri ma haqqu Allahi ala al-ibad wa ma haqqu al-ibadi ala Allah? He said, Oh Mu'adh, do you know what Allah's right is upon His servants and what His servants' rights are upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? He presented it in a question. In another hadith narrated by Muslim, atadri ayu ayatin min kitabillahi ma'ak a'zam? He is telling Ka'b ibn Malik, do you know which verse is the greatest verse in the Quran? So he presents it as a question. The Prophet ﷺ could have said, hey, Ka'b, the greatest verse in the Quran is Ayatul Kursi. But he presents it in a question. Why is that? Right? He's making it into a conversation, a two-way conversation, as if he's not dictating the information. This is how it is. So he says, what do you think about that? Now he's posed a question. Now he has to think about it, right? Which kind of gets him more focused, gets the person more in tune, more focused, more have more desire and longing to actually know the answer, and therefore opens the heart and allows it to sink in the heart that much more effective manner. So when we present information, for a parent talking to their kids, don't just say, hey, that's haram, or hey, that's halal. Present it in a question. Say, you know what do you think about this? Also, it'll give you the kind of an edge, allowing you to know what's going on in their mind. We need to know what our kids are thinking, because they're exposed to a lot of things. So the more we know what's going on in their minds, the more we're able to engage them. Also, it gets away from the previous generations of dictating, forcing that information down their throat. We don't want Muslims to say, I was just born a Muslim, I was forced to do these things. We want them to say, I actually enjoy being a Muslim. I actually feel like, I'm participating in this faith. It's not just something that I was born in. A second strategy of the Prophet ﷺ was encourage questions by complementing the question. So sometimes the Prophet ﷺ would be asked a question. So instead of just answering it straight off the bat, he would kind of complement the question. An example of that, سئل رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم سأله أعرابي فقال أخبرني بما يقربني من الجنة ويباعدني من النار فقال لقد وفق أو لقد هدي. So someone comes to the Prophet ﷺ and asks him, Ya Rasulullah, tell me something that will get me closer to Allah and distance me from the hellfire. So the Prophet ﷺ, before answering the question, he said, that is a well asked question. That is a question of guidance. Or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided you to that question, kind of complimenting the person. What's interesting, when you read books on public speaking, they say you should always reply to the person, that's a good question. And don't say that's a good question to some people and not others. Because if one person, they ask a question, you don't say that's a good question, and the other person you do, it might intimidate others from asking. They might say, I'm going to look foolish if I ask a question. It might not be a good question. So to always say, that's a good question, or not to say it at all. Right? So you can kind of see that in the Prophet ﷺ, how he would engage his companions. And to conclude, and there are other strategies, I encourage you to look it up, I just don't have enough time. To conclude, let's look at two hadith about the virtues of seeking knowledge. One is a short one, the other one is a little bit longer. Bukhari and Muslim narrate that the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man yuridillahu bihi khayran, yufaqqihhu fid din." Whoever Allah wants good for, He makes them faqih. I'm not translating this. He makes them a faqih in the faith, right? Not knowledgeable in the faith, but a faqih in the faith. What's the difference? Knowledge can be information, meaning, there have been scholars whose ability to memorize it surpasses computers today, and their ability to regurgitate that knowledge is, subhanAllah, almost flawless. However, when you ask them questions, critical questions, they're unable to answer it. Right? So Ibn Uthaymeen rahmatullah says that he knew someone who had a massive book memorized, page to page, Al-Furu', right? This is a massive book. He has it memorized. But if you were to ask him to give the opinion of this school on a certain issue that's in the book, he'll be unable to present it, even though he has it memorized, right? What the Prophet ﷺ here is saying, a faqih in the religion, meaning someone who understands the religion. There's a difference. There's a difference. A scholar is someone who understands the religion and is able to interact with current times. He's able to deal with current times. He knows or she knows how to pinpoint the problem of today and what the solution is. This is a faqih. We need to be fuqaha in the religion. It's people who understand the religion, not people who just say, we just pray 5 times a day, and the faith is about screaming and yelling and and that's it, and Islam is the truth, right? And Islam is the solution, and all these slogans that kind of arouse emotions but are baseless, really. Yeah, we understand that Islam is the solution. Yes, we believe it. But can you tell me how it's the solution to our times today? SubhanAllah, Umar Quraishi, you might know him. I was having a conversation with him a few weeks ago. And he's in the USC program with Dr. Sherman Jackson. Dr. Sherman Jackson is an intellectual. I had the privilege of taking a class with him, and I hope to get more opportunities with him. He says that when he started the program with him, now Umar Quraishi, he did the classical studies and Azhar and whatnot. And so when he started with him, Sherman Jackson said, listen, you know nothing. So what do you mean? He's like, you know absolutely nothing. Why? Because the world of modernity is a complex world. It is a complex, complicated, intertwined world. And if you want to truly understand it, you have to read massive amounts of books. The problems of today, right? How we got to today is not simply black and white. It's not simply, we could care less about God and we are going on. If you want to understand how we got to today, you have to look at 500 years of history. And what you find, and something I discovered recently, what you find is that what got us to philosophy or to modernity today. The lifestyle of disembedded, or where God is disembedded from our lives, right? How we got there actually started by Christian philosophers, but unintentionally. Unintentionally. They were trying to solve the problems of medieval Europe, right? And they tried doing it through the lens of Christianity. And this, I've read a few books, all of it seems to point. The modernity of today, the lack of godliness, the atheism and the humanistic society we live in, the humanism, right? All comes from Christian philosophers, or at least philosophers who cared about their religion of Christianity. But again, they didn't intend for this to happen. That wasn't their goal. But it comes from certain philosophies that people live by. I mentioned in the beginning that philosophers argue about what is the essence of the human being. And there are three schools here. You have the human is a soul. Another school, the human is the body. And the third one is the human is a psyche. You are thoughts. That is your essence, right? That is what makes you who you are. Okay, it doesn't seem relevant. Who cares, right? What we are. It makes a lot of difference. Why? Because if our perception on who we are is that we are thoughts, we are a psyche, well, guess what? You can mold a person's thoughts in an infinite amount of ways. There are no limits in the way you can mold your mind. And if our essence is our mind, well, if my mind tells me I have no gender, then what's wrong with that? You see that? So this whole gender fluidity and all that stuff, it's not coming out of nowhere. It's coming from a philosophy. It's coming from philosophers. And he mentions, Charles Taylor, mentions something else. That in this time, Christians were moving away from an enchanted world, away from spirits, away from this superstition, all this mumbo jumbo. They disenchanted the world to where it became a rational world. We understand everything rationally, scientifically. But he said an unintended result of that is that it killed emotions. Your emotions no longer have a role in understanding the world. But if our emotions are critical to who we are as a human being, meaning our emotions have something to do with our humanity, and now we killed it. And what's interesting, and excuse me for this example, what is the difference between the sexual revolution in the 60s and the sexual revolutions of now? What is the difference? You know what the difference is? And I just learned this. In the 60s, the sexual revolution is about couples who actually love each other, wanting to express their love in a more limitless manner. Whereas today, the sexual revolution is about doing it completely void of emotion. Why? Because rationality killed the emotions. Rationally, I don't need to have love for this person. Rationally, I don't need to have emotions for this act. Rationally speaking, why not? Right? So what's going on today, it's not just coincidence, or it's not just series of causes and effects. It's very much embedded in ideologies that were taught over the centuries. And what's even more interesting is that Islam never had these problems. Never. Because the way Islam presents itself is far more balanced than that. And it also kind of, something clicked in my mind. That when the scholars went after the Jahmis and the Mu'tazilites and these philosophical schools of the Islamic world, right? Now the Western world criticizes us for that. Oh, you killed, innovation in Islam. You killed rationality. Of course, all that is mumbo jumbo. It's all false. What now I'm starting to appreciate is that if the scholars didn't do that, the Muslim world would probably be more like the craziness that's going on in our times today. Because when rationality knows no limits, it kills the emotion. It needs to be balanced. Yes, we have rationality. Yes, we have reason, but we also have emotions. We are able to relate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through khushu'. What's khushu'? The emotions. When we look at the mountains, the world around us, it's supposed to bring awe to us. It's not a rational process. It's an emotional process. But how much better can we experience Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who He is, and learn about who He is than our emotions? Feeling that awe, when we see something beautiful. Seeing Allah's might, feeling it, right, has much more impact on the individual than understanding how a hurricane works. Again, there's nothing wrong with understanding that. But this has its role, and this has its role. Muslims were able to use both in a way, in a balanced way, where we took the best of this and the best of that without the harms of this and the harms of that. Islam came with both. Yes, there's rationality. And all scholars were rational. All of them. All this stuff that Ibn Taymiyyah wasn't rational, let's all throw in the garbage. These are people who never read his books, right? But at the same time, him and Imam Ghazali and others understood that there's a limit for rationality. Science has an ability to understand the world, but it cannot answer all questions. It cannot. Why a person is suffering is not a scientific question. It's not. Science cannot answer that. Other things can. Spiritual theology can. Take the best of this and the best of that, without the over-rationality of this and without the superstition of this. Because Islam did come and it removed all those superstitions, false ideologies. For example, omens, right? Bad omens. If you see a crow, for example, flying, that means that's bad luck. Throw it in the garbage. That's the disenchantment we don't want, right? Or that's the enchantment that we don't want. Throw it away. It's no good. It's illogical, right? While keeping the emotions intact. And to conclude with this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ says in a hadith narrated by Abu Dawood and At-Tirmidhi, من سلك طريقا يبتغي به فيه علما سهل الله له طريقا إلى الجنة وإن الملائكة لا تضع أجنحتها لطالب العلم رضا بما يصنع وإن العالم لا يستغفر له من في السماوات ومن في الأرض حتى الحيتان في الماء وفضل العالم على العابد كفضل القمر على سائر الكواكب وإن العلماء ورثة الأنبياء وإن الأنبياء لم يورثوا دينارا ولا درهما وإنما ورثوا العلم فمن أخذه أخذ بحظ وافر. This is such, I love it, right? I love this hadith. It's a little bit longer and I wish I had more time to actually go into details here, but I'll just translate it for you. Whoever seeks a path or follows a path seeking knowledge, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ease a path for him or make a path for him to paradise that is easy. What more do you want than that? But you get more. This is Allah you're dealing with, right? Allah is the most generous. He then says, the Prophet ﷺ then says, indeed the angels will humble their wings for the student of knowledge out of appreciation and acceptance and pleasure for what they are seeking. Imagine, you come to this lecture, right? The angels are humbling themselves for you. Those pure angels, subhanAllah. And indeed, the scholar, rather everything in the heavens and the earth, even the whales in the ocean, do istighfar, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive the scholar. But I will touch on this. Why? Because the scholar benefits everything and everyone. Because it's a scholar who's teaching people don't harm animals. And therefore animals are benefiting from that person. It is the scholar who's teaching us do not just pluck trees and plants for no reason. It is the scholar who's teaching us that. Right? It is the scholar who's saying if you slaughter an animal, do it in a humane manner, in the manner that is least harmful for the animal. So the scholar is benefiting everyone and everything, and therefore the reward for that is that everything and everyone do istighfar for that individual. And the virtue of a scholar over the worshipper is like the difference between the moon and all of the other planets, meaning, or all of the other stars. Meaning, when it's a full moon out, it's brighter at night. Therefore, you cannot see the stars. It completely eclipses the stars. That is the difference between a scholar and a worshipper of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course, in both is good. And indeed, the scholars are the inheritors of prophets, and the prophets did not leave behind money. They did not leave behind gold or silver. Rather, they left behind knowledge. So the more a person seeks knowledge, the more prophetic they can be. The more on the path of the prophets they are. And in this, قُلْ هَذِهِ سَبِيلِي أَدْعُو إِلَى اللَّهِ عَلَى بَصِيرَةٍ. Say, this is my path, I call to Allah in an insightful manner, meaning with knowledge. So whoever takes it, meaning takes knowledge, they have taken something that is, quite bountiful, quite productive, and quite rewarding. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among the students of knowledge, to help increase our knowledge, and to make us among those who are people of paradise through knowledge. Jazakumullah khair. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.